Previously on this channel, I made a video about playing a video game so much you dream about it, which is called the Tetris effect. But have you ever heard of a game that simply playing it could drive you clinically insane? There's a compelling urban legend about an arcade game called Polybius that did just this. The legend goes that Polybius was released in 1981 in the suburbs of Portland, Oregon, and that no more than 12 cabinets were installed in arcade halls. The gameplay featured fast action with puzzle elements and complicated graphics. Apparently, kids that played the game could no longer remember where they lived or even their own names, though it is unknown if this amnesia was permanent or if it wore off. They would have unbearable nightmares and wake in the night screaming. Supposedly, none of them would ever play video games again, and one would eventually become an anti-video game advocate. It gets weirder. Arcade operators in the area describe seeing government agents coming to retrieve the play data, but were uninterested in the coins inside the machine. Within about a month, the cabinets were all removed, never to be seen again, save for a few reports from collectors that may or may not be true. Ironically, Polybius is also the name of a Greek historian from the Hellenistic period who is known for his claim that historians should never report what they cannot verify through eyewitness testimony. But we're going to take a look at if this is even possible first, and then how valid the claim is. The very first things that jump out to me are the supposed effects on the player. These immediately reminded me of a story I heard from the 90s, claiming that there was a certain Pokemon episode with flashing lights that upon airing in Japan, gave the kids who watched it seizures. I stopped believing this because photosensitive epilepsy is rare, affecting 1 in 4,000 people. And sure, maybe a few kids who had this would be affected by the episode, but there's no way that kids without photosensitive epilepsy would have seizures from the flashing lights from this episode of Pokemon. However, I looked into it, and sure enough, Season 1, Episode 38 of Pokemon aired on December 16, 1997 at 6:30 p.m. By 7:30, 618 people, mostly children, had been admitted into the hospital with symptoms such as nausea, headache, irritated eyes, shortness of breath, convulsions, vomiting, and full-blown seizures after subsequently watching this episode of Pokemon. Reports suggested up to 12,000 kids experienced dizziness and blurred vision apart from hospital visits. Given 40 million people tuned in, that is simply way too many cases to be explained by photosensitive epilepsy. Dr. Robert Bartholomew and Benjamin Radford co-authored a paper on this outbreak that baffled scientists called Pokemon Contagion, Photosensitive Epilepsy or Mass Psychogenic Illness. In the paper, the two essentially conclude that the symptoms present indicate more that this was an episode of mass hysteria taking place than that many people having epileptic seizures. This means that the symptoms were very real and not faked, but the cause of them for many of the children was not epilepsy, rather mass photogenic illness, kind of like large group placebo. I also immediately thought of some of the motion sickness effects that VR can cause. I know that I've been made sick and even fallen to the ground in VR from either a bad frame rate or moving around too fast. Children from 2 to 12 are most susceptible to this effect, and research has shown that the perception of motion when not actually moving leads to sensory conflict. It's theorized that this sensory conflict can cause virtual reality sickness. Basically, your senses perceive both that you are moving, but also that you are not moving, and this causes some disorientation. As for the horrible nightmares, we already know that simple repetitive tasks and games can give players dreams, and I go over this in my Tetris Effect video. As far as disturbing nightmares go, there are some conflicting studies on their correlation with video games. But one study from the journal Pediatrics suggests that playing video games close to bedtime can lead to nightmares for children. Besides the claimed psychoactive effects, we need to know whether or not the American government would implement an experiment like this, as that is part of the Polybius claim. Well, you don't need to be a conspiracy theorist to know about Project MK Ultra, where the CIA used high doses of LSD, electroshocks, and hypnosis to attempt mind control on unwitting subjects. And this is just what's known by the public. Imagine the horrible experiments done that are classified and the public will never know of. I definitely do not think that an experiment like Polybius would be beyond the scope of the US government. With those things in mind, I tend to think that Polybius is certainly possible. And I think that if this was a hoax, the fact that it walks the line of just barely being believable is what makes it so compelling. But that doesn't make it true. We need to look at what's out there to determine if this could be true. Obviously, there's no hard evidence, or else we would just know that there was a government-funded experimental crowdsourced game called Polybius. There's only traces and fragments out there, and we only have a few pieces to pick up. There are very many red herrings out there, with people claiming to have ROMs or actual cabinets, but the ROM has never turned up, save for some obvious fakes, and all the cabinets appear to be recreation for novelty's sake or photoshops. So we should start with the earliest source we can find. Stuart Brown of Ahoy and Brian Dunning of Skeptoid have done some incredible digging into the origins of Polybius, and I highly recommend checking out their video and podcast respectively if you're interested in diving into this. Brown finds that the earliest mention of the game, online or in print, is from February 2000. Dunning agrees, but thinks that Polybius must have been around as early as 1984 to inspire the novel Arcade and the movie The Last Starfighter. Arcade is centered around an admittedly fictional game called Spacescape that matches the Polybius description exactly, an arcade game that causes its players to lose their minds. The Last Starfighter is about a teenager abducted by a mysterious man in black for having the high score in an arcade game being secretly monitored. Both of these 1984 works of fiction definitely sound familiar. But there's no reason to think that the Polybius myth had to inspire these and not the other way around. Dunning's greatest finds are what he believes to be the truthful roots of the Polybius myth. In late 1981, a perfect storm happened leading to its creation. First of all, on November 29, 1981, 2 children fell ill in the same Portland, Oregon arcade. One was going for an Asteroids World Record and played over 28 hours. He had to stop due to stomach discomfort, citing anxiety from the game, and also the inordinate amount of Coca-Cola he had ingested. The other developed migraine while playing Tempest and passed out in someone's lawn. 10 days later, federal agents raided arcades in Portland because people had rigged some of the games to be used for gambling. Prior to the raid, the FBI had been taking pictures of some games' high scorers' initials in order to identify witnesses. Also, the US military had been using commercial video games for training purposes as early as 1980. Finally, over 1,000 East German arcade cabinets, which were called Polyplay, were recalled after the fall of the Berlin Wall in 1989. Dunning believes, with everything here, it would be more surprising if an urban legend like Polybius didn't exist. Stuart Brown digs deep into the Polybius myth and concludes that it's nothing more than just a hoax. He ties up every loose end and investigates every rumor. It all leads back to Polybius's first appearance on the web, February of 2000, on a site called coinop.org, which is an online encyclopedia of all arcade games. Brown deduces that Kurt Kohler, the man who runs coinop.org, is the originator of the myth and entered Polybius into his encyclopedia as a hoax. The CoinOp entry for Polybius, which I've linked in the video's description, has a field where members can leave ratings and comments on the game. This text box is very interesting to say the least. Dozens of people claim to remember the game, and some say they've played it. An equal number of people say the whole thing is a hoax, but almost all of the comments are from 2003. Of the people that claim to have played it, they do report feeling strange afterwards, but most say the game's effects are exaggerated in the urban legend. Many of the comments believe Polybius was a prototype for the Atari game Tempest. Obviously, we can't believe any of these comments, as it seems like anyone can hop on here and leave a comment, but I thought it was interesting that so many people claim to have seen it, played it, or know about it in some sense. Another piece of information I thought was interesting is that the Polybius logo and company Lotion follow the game through every fake ROM or cabinet. There's a screenshot of the game's title screen on its coin-op entry showing these two things. Now, the company Lotion has actually never existed, and it seems to be an attempt to combine the German words for sense and delete. But it's not a German word, more likely what an English speaker would try and come up with for a German word. But it is odd that the same font and logo for Polybius is consistent across all permutations of the game. Did it all originate from the coinop.org screenshot? Probably. Unfortunately, the 80s had so many obscure arcade games that some may be lost to history at this point. And this is why we may never know the hard truth about Polybius. It would take the originator of the myth stepping forward and admitting to making it up. But even then, how could anyone know the person admitting to it is really the originator? In all likelihood, the entire urban legend is just made up. On the other hand, there's a small possibility that Polybius did exist in some form as an arcade game. But like I said, the truth about Polybius may never be known. This is Fake Life Lore. Thanks for watching.